The Atlanta sun had started to dip below the skyline, casting long golden streaks over the quiet streets. Rush hour was fading, and a gentle calm was settling over the city. John Cena and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson were winding down after a long day filled with speeches, photos, and a charitable fundraiser that had gone longer than expected. They were both dressed casually. Hoodies, sneakers, baseball caps pulled low, not wanting to attract attention as they made their way back across town. Their driver had taken the evening off after the event, and rather than calling for a car service, John suggested something a bit more down to earth. "Let's take the bus," he said, grinning as he shoved his phone into his pocket. "Let's see if anyone even notices." Dwayne laughed. "You serious?" John nodded. "Why not? No fanfare, no pressure, just two guys on a city ride." Minutes later, they stood on the corner of a quiet intersection, waiting at a bus stop like any other pair of locals. The blue and white Metro 7 bus pulled up, its brakes hissing. They boarded without a word, paid their fare, and made their way to the back, where only a few tired commuters were scattered across the seats. Neither man spoke much at first. The hum of the engine and the gentle rocking of the bus provided a rare moment of peace. Through the grimy windows, Atlanta rolled by in slow motion. Storefronts, streetlights flickering on, people heading home, closing shops. 3 rows up from them sat a slender older woman with a tired but dignified look. Her name, though they didn't know it yet, was Mabel Thompson. She wore a light-colored coat over her nurse's scrubs, her gray hair tucked neatly under a patterned scarf. Her eyes were heavy with fatigue, her shoulders slightly hunched forward. On her lap rested a large cloth bag filled with medicine, a bottle of water, and a folded white cardigan. Mabel had just finished a 12-hour shift at the county hospital. She had spent most of it on her feet, changing IVs, comforting frightened patients, checking blood pressure, and answering nonstop calls from the ER. She'd forgotten to eat. Her stomach ached. But more than anything, she just wanted to get home and soak her feet. At the front of the bus, the driver glanced at the small screen on his fare monitor and frowned. He looked into the rearview mirror and then down again. One of the recent tap-ins had not registered. He pressed a button to flag the transaction and squinted at the reflection of the passengers. He had noticed Mabel get on a few stops earlier. He thought she had just walked past the reader without paying. Maybe he was mistaken, but he had to report it. Procedure was procedure. He pressed the silent alert button under the console. At the next major intersection, the bus pulled over and opened its doors. 2 white uniformed police officers boarded. They didn't look rushed. They were calm, almost slow in their movements, but their presence shifted the energy in the vehicle instantly. The younger officer had close-cut hair and a sharp jawline. His partner was heavier, with small eyes and a belt that clanked with each step. The driver leaned slightly over and whispered to the first officer. He pointed discreetly toward Mabel. "She got on 3 stops ago," he said. "Didn't pay, walked right through." The officers exchanged glances, then slowly walked down the aisle. John Cena looked up from under his cap, his body still watching. Dwayne didn't move either. They both noticed how the officers seemed to focus in immediately on the older woman. "Good evening, ma'am," the younger officer said as he stopped beside Mabel. "We received a report that you refused to pay your fare. Is that true?" Mabel blinked, confused, her tired eyes wide. "What? No, I thought it worked. I tapped my card, I swear. I didn't hear anything, but I thought—" "Do you have your ticket or receipt?" the officer asked flatly. She began rummaging through her bag. Her hands shook a little from fatigue. She pulled out a wrinkled card, a few receipts from the hospital pharmacy, and a bottle of aspirin. Here, this is my bus card. I use it every day. I didn't mean. We're not saying you're a thief, said the heavier officer, his tone condescending. But fare evasion is an offense, and if you don't have proper ID, we'll need to bring you in to verify your identity. I'm a nurse, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I work over at County General. I just finished a long shift. Please, I just want to go home. At the back of the bus, John's hands clenched slightly. Dwayne leaned forward a bit, watching silently. Mabel continued digging. My wallet. I think I left it in my locker, but I have my hospital badge, see? Look, please. The officer barely glanced at it. The younger one made a face as if trying not to roll his eyes. No government-issued ID? He asked. No, she said quietly. He nodded to his partner. All right, stand up. You'll have to come with us. What? Please. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong. You're interfering with a government service. Fare evasion. Failure to identify. Let's go. He reached out and grabbed her by the arm, not violently, but firmly. Still, she gasped from the pressure. That's when John Cena stood up. Hey, he said, his voice calm but deep. Let go of her. She's not resisting. You're hurting her. The officer didn't let go. Instead, he turned his head slowly and narrowed his eyes at John. This doesn't concern you. Sit down, sir. Dwayne stood too, now beside John. If you're arresting her because of a malfunctioning machine and no ID, maybe check the cameras before you drag an old woman into the back of a car, he said. The heavier officer stepped forward. You're interfering. Final warning. I'm asking you to use basic human decency, said John. She's a nurse. She's exhausted. She didn't steal anything. Back off, or we'll have to detain you too. John's jaw tensed. I'm not stepping back while you manhandle someone who clearly didn't mean harm. The younger officer clicked his radio. Dispatch, we've got a 10-33, interference, possible assault, request backup. Repeat, request backup. Dwayne stared in disbelief. You're serious? He muttered. You're calling backup because we spoke? The officer's hand moved toward his belt. Behind them, phones were up. At least 3 passengers were filming. The mood in the bus had shifted from confused to tense. As one officer reached for his taser, John's hand instinctively caught his wrist, freezing it in midair. Don't, he said flatly. Everything stopped. Just for a second. The officer's partner reached for his baton, and in that moment, everything was about to explode. The moment froze in thick silence. All eyes in the bus were locked on the standoff unfolding near the center aisle. Mabel, still held by the arm, looked up at John Cena, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion, fear, and disbelief. The passengers behind her barely breathed. The younger officer's wrist was caught in John's powerful grip, immobilized mid-reach for his taser. For a moment, neither moved. The officer's eyes narrowed. Release me, now, he growled. John slowly let go, raising both hands. I didn't attack you. I stopped you from escalating this. No one here is a threat. His tone was calm, steady, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. The older officer stepped forward, baton half raised. Dwayne took a single step between him and Mabel. Don't, he warned. Just think about what you're doing. There are cameras on this bus. People are filming. He wasn't lying. 2 teenagers in the middle row had their phones up, recording everything. A young woman near the door was live streaming to Instagram, the comments already flooding in. He's assaulting her. Is that John Cena? WTF is happening on this bus? But the officers weren't backing down. The older one looked directly at Dwayne, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, great. Two celebrities think they can police the police. You're not in the ring now, tough guy. Dwayne's eyes didn't flinch. You're not in a courtroom either, but you're about to need a lawyer if you don't let go of that woman. The younger officer finally released Mabel's arm. She staggered back, clutching her elbow. John gently steadied her. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, though her body trembled. I didn't do anything, she whispered. I just wanted to go home. The tension in the bus hung like fog, thick and suffocating. The officers stood their ground, breathing heavy. The older one raised his radio. Dispatch, we've got a 10-33 in progress. Officers attacked. Suspects are resisting. Passengers gasped. You're lying, someone yelled. He just said they didn't do anything. You're abusing your power. The woman with the live stream shouted. They're trying to twist this. I've got it all on video from the start. John's eyes flicked toward the radio. Don't do that, he said. Don't call backup with a false report. You know we didn't attack you. The officer sneered. You laid hands on me. That's assault. Dwayne stepped forward again, his voice cold and direct. You reached for a taser against a woman who was sitting quietly with a hospital badge in her hand. You don't have a case. What you have is a problem with accountability. The officer's hand tightened around the baton. That's it. Without warning, he lunged forward, swinging, but Dwayne moved faster. He caught the baton mid-swing, twisted it from the officer's grip, and shoved him back. The man stumbled, hitting a pole. At the same instant, the younger officer went for his taser again, aiming at John. But John was already in motion. He stepped forward, deflected the officer's arm to the side, and kicked the taser from his grip in one fluid movement. It clattered across the floor, sliding under a seat. Gasps, screams, phones raised higher. In less than 5 seconds, both officers were disarmed. John stepped between them and the rest of the bus. Dwayne stood in front of Mabel, arms crossed, calm but unshakable. No one's going anywhere with you, John said. You've crossed the line. And now the whole world's going to see it. The officers were breathing hard, angry and humiliated. The older one, red-faced, looked like he was ready to lunge again, but his partner hesitated. Then came the voice. We're live, gentlemen, the girl from the front said, waving her phone. You're on 20,000 screens right now. Keep going. Make it worse. The younger officer froze. Dispatch, cancel backup, he muttered into his radio. Situation de-escalated. His partner stared at him in disbelief. What the hell are you doing? I'm not losing my badge over this, he snapped. You saw the phones. You saw who they are. We'll get reamed if we push this further. The older man turned to the driver. Call this in now. But the driver just sat silently, unsure what to do. John turned to Mabel. Come sit with us. You're not alone. She hesitated, then followed them to the back, still clutching her bag to her chest. The other passengers began to speak out more. Why'd you even target her? She's a nurse, man. She looked exhausted. She paid. I saw her. She tapped the reader. The officers stood frozen, still processing what just happened. Dwayne leaned down to one of the teenagers filming. Send me that video, will you? The boy nodded quickly. Already posted. It's blowing up. John sat beside Mabel, gently taking her bag and placing it beside her seat. You're safe now, he said. We'll make sure they don't touch you again. She looked at him, her eyes glassy with tears. I didn't think anyone would stand up for me. You deserve it, he replied. The bus rolled on. The officers stepped off at the next stop, defeated and silent. Behind them, a wave of applause broke out, not loud, not dramatic, but honest, from real people who had just seen what courage looked like. Outside, night had fully fallen. Inside the bus, something had shifted. Not just justice served, but dignity restored. The bus continued down its route, rolling quietly through the dimly lit streets of Atlanta. Inside, the atmosphere remained tense, but the sharp edge of fear had softened. Mabel sat between John and Dwayne now, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lips trembled and her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as if afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Despite everything, she hadn't said much since sitting down. Her whole body seemed to hold the weight of years of unspoken exhaustion and quiet acceptance. For a long time, no one said a word. John finally broke the silence. "Do you want us to call someone? Family? Maybe a co-worker?" Mabel shook her head slowly. "I just want to get home," she said quietly. "That's all." Dwayne leaned forward slightly. "We'll make sure you do, safe and sound." Passengers nearby nodded in agreement. One woman in a business suit turned around from her seat ahead of them. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. That was disgusting. They had no reason." "They thought I wouldn't fight back," Mabel said, her voice barely audible. "They thought I'd just go quietly." "They do that to people like us all the time," added an older man across the aisle. "But not today." The teen with the phone approached, holding it up. "Miss Mabel, that video, it's already going viral, like 100,000 views. People are sharing it like crazy. It's trending under #JusticeForMabel." John glanced at the screen. The footage clearly showed everything, from the officers approaching her, to the grip on her arm, to the moment Dwayne and he stepped in. There was no room for twisting the facts, no editing needed. It was all there. Another passenger pulled out her tablet and began searching. There are already news outlets covering it, local and national. They're calling it excessive force and misconduct. John looked out the window, jaw tight. Good. Let people see it for what it was. At the next stop, a young black woman with a baby stroller boarded and looked around. She recognized Dwayne and froze. "Oh my God, was that really you? And him?" Dwayne smiled softly. "Long day." The woman shook her head in disbelief. "I saw the video already. I was just watching it on my phone outside. Y'all were on that bus?" She turned her camera on and pointed it discreetly in their direction. "Y'all just saved that woman's life." "I wouldn't say that," John replied. "We just did what was right." "You did more than that," she said. "You gave us proof. That's everything." A few minutes later, the bus came to a slow stop. The driver turned around and stood up looking nervous. I just got a call from headquarters," he announced, addressing the bus. "They saw the footage. They're asking if the officers are still aboard. I told them they left." "You told them right," muttered someone from the back. "They're asking for witness statements, but I told them most of y'all already posted everything online. They're backing off. For now." John turned to the driver. "You did what you had to do. Just keep driving." But it wasn't over yet. Outside the window, a patrol car had begun following them at a distance. Not aggressively, not with sirens, but it was there, lurking, watching. Dwayne noticed first. "They're trailing us." John followed his gaze. "You think they're going to try something?" "Maybe. Or maybe they're just hoping to intimidate." From the front, the driver glanced at the rearview mirror. "We're almost to the transfer station. That's where most people switch lines. It's well lit, cameras everywhere. You want me to let y'all off there?" John looked at Mabel. "You good with that?" She nodded. As long as it's safe. The next 10 minutes passed in silence. The patrol car never left their tail. Inside the bus, people whispered, watched, filmed, waited. When they finally pulled into the terminal, the floodlights above bathed the lot in harsh white. There were more people waiting at the platform, some already staring at their phones, holding up devices and whispering among themselves. John stood first, helping Mabel with her bag. Dwayne stepped off beside them, scanning the area. The patrol car rolled up but didn't park, just slowed, then turned away into the next lane. A man in a gray coat approached. He had a lanyard around his neck, identifying him as a news producer. "Mr. Cena? Mr. Johnson? Would you be willing to comment on what happened tonight?" "No," said John calmly. "Not here. Not now. This woman needs to get home." Mabel raised her hand slightly. "They can talk to me later, after I sleep." The crowd began to grow, people drawn in by the online buzz and curiosity. But no one stepped too close. There was a strange reverence in the air, like something important had just happened and everyone knew it. Someone from the hospital arrived, a middle-aged man in scrubs who greeted Mabel by name. "They called me," he said. "I saw the video. I'll take you home. You don't have to worry about anything else tonight." She turned to John and Dwayne. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." John shook his head. "I think you would have stood up for yourself either way. You've got strength." She smiled, and for the first time that night, it reached her eyes. As she left with her colleague, John and Dwayne stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by distant cameras and quiet applause. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was sincere. Back at police headquarters, however, something else was happening. The two officers from the bus sat in an internal affairs office, stone-faced, watching the footage on a monitor. A captain stood over them, arms crossed. "Is there any part of this," he said slowly, "you want to explain before I bring in the mayor's office?" Neither spoke. The video paused on the frame where Mabel was wincing from the officer's grip. "This is the image being shared across the country right now," the captain continued. "Two white cops grabbing an elderly black nurse after a 12-hour shift because a card reader glitched." He turned away from them. "You've just become the department's problem." By the next morning, the story had broken across every major news outlet. Cable channels, morning talk shows, and social media feeds were flooded with the same clip over and over again. The shaky phone footage from inside the bus showing a calm, elderly black nurse being forcefully grabbed by two white officers, followed by the swift and precise intervention of John Cena and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It was undeniable, unedited, and impossible to ignore. Commentators called it a moment of clarity in the debate over police conduct and racial bias, while others accused the media of blowing the situation out of proportion. But for millions of viewers, the truth was clear. Mabel Thompson had become a symbol not because she asked to be, but because she had lived what too many others had lived quietly, dismissed, profiled, restrained, and accused for doing nothing but existing in the wrong skin at the wrong time. Her face now filled headlines with captions like "Justice on Bus Route 7" and "From Nurse to National Voice." In just 12 hours, her life had changed. John and Dwayne had remained quiet. Intentionally, they'd both left the terminal station the night before without giving interviews. But the pressure from the public was mounting. Statements were expected and soon demanded. Eventually, John's team released a simple video. No logos, no editing. Just him sitting in a plain chair, looking straight into the camera. "What we saw last night wasn't rare, it was recorded," he said. "And if Dwayne and I hadn't been there, if those phones weren't up, would anyone have believed her? Would anyone have cared? I don't want to be a hero. I want to be a witness, and I want people to understand that Mabel Thompson deserves more than applause. She deserves respect, and so do millions like her." The video went viral within an hour, garnering millions of views and sparking hashtags like #RespectForMabel, #BelieveBlackVoices, and #EverydayJustice. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Police Department found itself under intense scrutiny. Internal Affairs had launched an immediate investigation into Officers Darryl Combs and Eric Lowry. The two men involved in the incident both had previous complaints on file for excessive force, though none had resulted in disciplinary action. Until now, the video changed everything, especially since the false report of officer assault made by Lowry had already been debunked. The department held a press conference with the chief standing behind a podium, flanked by stern-faced captains. He tried to stay neutral, tried to emphasize protocol and due process, but the media wasn't having it. "Chief Owens, is it true that Officer Combs used force on an elderly woman without confirming whether a crime had even occurred? Were you aware of previous complaints against these officers? Will they be suspended with or without pay?" Across town, Mabel sat in her small apartment in a modest neighborhood surrounded by flowers, cards, and letters from strangers. Many addressed her by name. Others simply wrote, "To the nurse on the bus." She hadn't gone to work that day. Her hospital supervisor insisted she take paid time off to rest, but rest didn't come easy. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Her neighbor peeked in nervously. "Mabel, there's someone at the door I think you'll want to see." She opened it slowly, and there they stood. John and Dwayne, no cameras, no press, just them. "We thought we'd check in on you," John said. "Mind if we come in?" She smiled weakly and stepped aside. "Only if you don't mind tea." They sat around her tiny kitchen table while she poured from a chipped ceramic pot, her movements still stiff from the bruising on her arm, but there was more color in her face than the night before. "I can't believe all this attention over me," she said. "I've spent 35 years taking care of people not trying to be seen." "That's exactly why people should see you," Dwayne replied. "What happened to you happens to people every day, but they don't always have someone around to stop it or 100 phones pointed at it." Mabel looked down at her tea, then back up. "I didn't think I'd be the one that made a difference." "You did," John said simply. "You still are." Just then, her phone buzzed again, another message from someone she didn't know, a college student from Boston, thanking her for her courage. Mabel shook her head in disbelief. At that moment, her story was more than a moment, it was a spark. Later that evening, the department released a statement confirming that both officers had been placed on administrative leave pending disciplinary hearings, and that an independent review board would be evaluating department policy on use of force in nonviolent incidents. It was a small step, but one the public had demanded. A civil rights attorney offered pro bono representation to Mabel, and her legal complaint was already drafted. Multiple witnesses from the bus had submitted official statements, including the driver whose testimony was more damning than expected. He admitted that Mabel had tapped her card and that the reader sometimes malfunctioned. He confirmed that she never raised her voice, never resisted, and that he regretted pressing the alert button. On the news, a heated debate was underway. Commentators split between defending the officers and calling for their dismissal. But the footage remained the strongest evidence. One frame in particular began circulating like wildfire. A still image showing Mabel's pained face as the officer's hand clutched her arm above it, the outstretched hand of John Cena beginning to grab the officer's wrist. It became an image of modern resistance, not violent, not angry, just human, a moment of intervention that said, enough is enough. In a televised town hall aired live, both John and Dwayne agreed to appear, not to speak about themselves, but to use the platform to let Mabel speak for herself. She stood on stage wearing a pale green dress and a hospital badge pinned proudly to her chest. "I'm not a symbol," she said into the microphone. "I'm not a political statement. I am a tired woman who gave her life to helping others and who asked for nothing but a ride home, and I will not apologize for wanting to be treated with dignity." The crowd stood and applauded, not for spectacle, but for truth. The days that followed were a blur of headlines, meetings, interviews, and mounting pressure on the Atlanta Police Department. The video had not faded, as viral stories often did. Instead, it grew spread into international outlets, drawing statements from national figures, celebrities, and activists alike. But, through it all, Mabel Thompson remained grounded. Despite the media frenzy surrounding her name, she still woke at 6, still made her tea, still called the hospital to check on patients she had left behind. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in justice and peace. Across the country, the story had sparked a conversation deeper than the incident itself. Communities began holding meetings, local governments reopened, cases involving similar abuses. And at the heart of it all was the image of a tired nurse in unnecessary arrest, and two men who decided to stand up not because of who they were, but because it was right. John Cena and Dwayne Johnson declined dozens of invitations to talk shows. Instead, they focused their voices where it mattered. They collaborated with local legal aid organizations, helping Mabel file a civil suit, not just for her own sake, but to push for changes in fair enforcement protocols in the city's public transportation system. They met with the mayor behind closed doors, demanding accountability, transparency, and a reformed response policy for minor fare disputes. Meanwhile, the disciplinary hearing for Officers Darryl Combs and Eric Lowry moved forward with unprecedented speed. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the video, but the testimonies from passengers, the bus driver, and even the live stream footage captured in real time that evening. Neither officer showed remorse during the proceedings. Lowry claimed he felt threatened by John's stature, while Combs insisted Mabel was being uncooperative. But the hearing board was not convinced. Within a week, both officers were officially terminated from the department and barred from future public service roles in the county. It was a rare and significant outcome, one that sent a message loud and clear, not only to Atlanta, but to departments across the country. Mabel stood outside City Hall the day the decision was announced. A small crowd had gathered not because of cameras, but because they believed in her. She spoke softly into a nearby reporter's mic, her words simple and clear. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted to be heard, and I was." A ripple of applause followed, but she turned from the microphones and walked away, not toward the spotlight, but toward a nearby bench where John and Dwayne waited. They rose as she approached, and Dwayne handed her a folded paper. "It's done," he said. "We got the new policy passed. No more arrests over fare disputes, not without real cause and proper review." Mabel unfolded the document, read the title, and closed her eyes. The policy wasn't just a win. It was a step forward for the countless people who never had a camera to defend them. Later that evening, Mabel was back on the bus route. Not for protest or attention, but because she had promised her neighbor she'd help deliver meals to a local shelter. She tapped her card and walked past the reader, which beeped correctly. This time, the driver recognized her and nodded with quiet respect. In the back row, two teenagers whispered excitedly and pointed, but Mabel simply smiled and found a seat near the middle. Where the sunlight touched the window, she looked out at the city. Not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as someone who had been reminded that decency still existed and that justice, when demanded with enough truth, strength, and witness, could actually arrive. John and Dwayne didn't return to the bus that week. They didn't need to. Their part was done, but the ripple continued. School kids debated the case in classrooms, activists used the video in training seminars, and Mabel's speech from the town hall was played at a national conference on police reform. 1 month later, she returned to work walking through the hospital doors as if nothing had changed. Though everyone knew otherwise, her name badge now read Nurse Mabel Thompson, RN Advocate, in fine print beneath her title. On her first lunch break back, she received a letter from a woman in Kansas whose brother had once been wrongly arrested. For the same reason, the letter ended with 3 words that made Mabel pause, then smile, "Thank you anyway." As she tucked the letter into her pocket and returned to her station, she glanced at the clock and whispered to herself, "Time to get back to work." If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that matter. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?